Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Tumblin. Vulnerability, it's a bit of a buzzword these days, isn't it? It's often said that you need to, quote, quote, be vulnerable in relationships to become closer to the other person. Hence, it is seen as a virtue. But what does it really mean to be vulnerable? What do we mean when we say that? Does it tie in with the cardinal virtues of Stoicism and of virtue ethics overall? In other words, is it stoic to actually be vulnerable? This podcast is part of the Walled Garden Podcast Network. Consider checking that out to learn more. You can also support me on my Patreon. It's not expected, but it's deeply appreciated if you want to support me on there. And my philosophical mentoring options are available on there. And I'm not taking on a whole lot of new people because I'm kind of maxed out here. So if you are interested in philosophical mentoring by myself, go check that out sooner rather than later. And hey, it's soon going to be January, so it's the new year coming up. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to get some philosophical mentoring. Also consider checking out my Telegram group chat where you can join in on the other Strong Stoics or with the other Strong Stoics to discuss the podcast episodes. And we also do some live chats on there, which is really personal, and we just kind of have a chat once a month is what I've been doing. But it's really just an opportunity for me to kind of get to know the people that are really interested and really want to be engaged with the content. So I know it's not going to be a lot of people, but it is going to be people that are really engaging in it. And so that's what that is for. And also my articles are on Medium and the Stoic Gym magazine. And finally, consider checking out my newsletter at Substack. You can join there. You get the episodes emailed directly to your emails and all of the other things that I do. Let's break down what people mean when they say that you have to be vulnerable. Really, what this advice means is that you should put your guard down and open up. It means that you should tell the other person what you really feel, how you really feel, what you're going through, but also what you've been through. It's also a past thing as well. In one phrase, perhaps we could say that being vulnerable means letting people in. Imagine a newly formed couple as an example here. They're each bringing a bit of baggage to the relationship. That's a very normal thing, meaning they both have past experiences, and these experiences have given them some history, some trauma, and a lot of experiences that they're contending with. These could include old toxic partners, for example, old toxic relationships. It could include childhood trauma, which we all have in some capacity, or maybe even some trauma from a past job. You can imagine veterans that have to carry around some PTSD, or also just a very stressful, toxic work environment, because those exist as well, and people do have a very similar, it's similar in the sense that you can carry a lot of baggage from that old company into your new company if you're not dealing with it properly. So it can be a very dangerous thing. The next time that you go out into the world, make it a habit to look around at all the people that's sort of walking around. The chances are that each person that you're seeing is struggling with something. We all have something that we're internally struggling with. Yes, even that person that's driving the $1 million fancy sports car with the Rolex watch. Again, in Stoicism, wealth isn't necessarily a good thing. And so it's not necessarily the case that just because someone has a lot of money that they are living a flourishing life, at least in Stoicism, and I tend to agree with that. Let me read you this quote by Jordan Peterson, though. He said, "That's how our civilization works. There's all these ruined people out there. They've got problems like you can't believe, and off they go to work and do things they don't even like, and look, the lights are on. My God, it's unbelievable. It's a miracle." Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. And it really is a miracle. Our very long evolution has led us to be able to form civilizations and societies. If you look around, that's what you see. And included in that is a lot of infrastructure as well, but also just government and laws. And we treat each other with kindness, and we treat each other with basic human decency and respect, sometimes even love. And that's amazing. That's a crazy thing to think about. What this means is that despite the work getting done, despite all of us showing up every day getting the work done, many of us, most of us, probably all of us are dealing with very complicated messes internally, maybe issues with our home life or something like that. And that's why kindness is a virtue, because you really have no idea what people are going through. And so it's always a good rule of thumb to kind of assume that and maybe put a kind foot forward when you're interacting with people in the world. Let's see if we can define vulnerability, though. We tried to do that earlier, or I tried to do that earlier very basically, but let's maybe go into a little bit more detail here. Vulnerability is letting people see that side of you, the brokenness, the baggage, and even the evil parts of you. It's not an easy thing to do. You literally have to sit someone down and say, listen, there are some things that I'm dealing with internally that I'm barely willing to even think about, let alone talk about. And if I open up to you and I let you in, I simultaneously open myself up to be judged, potentially harshly. That's what people worry about. These are the things that I am deeply ashamed of. Some because I'm embarrassed that I was foolish enough to let happen to me. I was too naive, wasn't wise enough, and others because I was evil enough to do that to other people. And so sometimes we're embarrassed because we were taken advantage of in the past, and sometimes we do things that aren't so great, that we're not so proud of, and we also have to contend with that. And letting people know both of those things, we all have examples of each, I'm sure, that is an act of vulnerability. And I can tell you, everyone has something that they've done that they're not necessarily proud of, that they'd rather do away with in terms of our personality as well. So there's things that we've done that we're not happy with. There's things that we're embarrassed about. There's things that have been done to us that we're embarrassed about. And there's also parts of us, psychologically speaking, that we're not so proud about, and maybe we'd rather do away with it. And to admit that openly in the presence of another person, it takes courage, the cardinal virtue of courage. Hell, most people can't even admit to themselves that these evil parts of you or of us exist. So why would we be willing to admit that to another person, that, hey, listen, maybe there's a part of me that's not fully realized. Maybe I have a lot more potential. Maybe I'm holding out on myself. Maybe I have a part of me that's even evil. And to say that openly and willingly, to offer that up voluntarily as a piece of information to someone else does make you, well, it makes you vulnerable to them, of course, because there is always the chance that they can take advantage of you. But that's exactly what vulnerability is. It's an act of courage. So when we think of courage, images of running into enemy fire come to mind. But courage in the Stoic sense, it also includes something called strength and fortitude. When we're talking about something like vulnerability, which is letting people see all sides of you, the good, the bad, the ugly, it certainly takes a tremendous amount of courage and, of course, strength and fortitude to do so. But before I go into that a little bit deeper, let me highlight something I just said there. Vulnerability is letting people see all sides of you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. In other words, we could say that vulnerability is having the courage to show someone your true self. In other words, yet again, we could say that vulnerability is having the courage to live according to nature. This is where it really gets tied in deeply with Stoicism. But we can even be a bit more clear on that phrase. Vulnerability is having the courage and strength to live according to nature. Because don't forget that in the Stoic sense, courage includes strength and fortitude. So you could also say to sum vulnerability up in one philosophical phrase and with a Stoic flair to it, you could say vulnerability is having the courage and strength to live according to nature. A lot of people confuse vulnerability with weakness, and this is not only untrue, but it's an anti-truth. It's the opposite of the truth. Vulnerability is not an act of weakness. Vulnerability is an act of strength. The reason is because when you choose to be vulnerable, what you are philosophically saying is, I'm going to have the courage and strength to be my full self, and that makes me vulnerable because I am arming you with the truth about myself, which you could then, in theory, use to take advantage of me. However, because I am strong, because I have fortitude, because I have strength, I know that if that happens, if you take advantage of me, I am going to be just fine. I'm willing to take that risk because if you take advantage of me, I have the strength to handle it. But if you don't, then maybe we can have a genuine connection, and that risk is worth it for me. It's easy to see then that one's level of vulnerability is actually tied to one's level of strength. In other words, only the strong can be truly vulnerable because they know that they are strong enough to deal with the potential of being taken advantage of. And if you're not, then you're just naive. If you're vulnerable and you are not strong, then you are simply naive because what you are doing is you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable in a position where you know, or maybe you don't know, but in either case, you can be taken advantage of and you can't recover from it. So that's not an act of strength or courage at that point. It's an act of foolishness. But what's the outer limits of that? If only the strong could be vulnerable, what's the outer limits of that? Let's put that to the extreme. Well, it's an act of strength to open up in front of one person. In other words, it's an act of strength and courage to be genuinely yourself in front of one person. But what about opening up to the entire world? What about genuinely being yourself? What about living according to nature? Not only in front of one person, not only in front of your family or your close friends, but what about doing it to the world itself? Then, not only one person could take advantage of you because of the truth that they know, because of your truth, but the whole damn world could take advantage of you. You might ask, well, how could one open up to the world? But let's go back to that definition. That really what opening up is living according to nature. It's the Stoic doctrine. That means honoring who you are and being genuine to yourself at all levels of analysis. Who you are as an individual, who you are in relationship to everyone else, who you are in relationship to reality herself, to the cosmos. What do you like? What defines your personality? But if you do that, you not only open yourself up to a deeper connection with one person, but to the cosmos herself. Living according to nature opens you up to the potential to making connection with everything. And that is, in the Stoic sense, God, because God, in the Stoic sense, is natural. It includes everything that exists, including other people, including animals, including inanimate objects, including the stars, including the universe. And so living according to nature, which is being genuinely yourself, which is an act of strength and also of vulnerability, opens you up to the potential to making connections with literally everything that exists, which is God, again, in the Stoic sense. A real question that stems from this, though, is that why do so many people live fake lives? Maybe fundamentally, we live fake lives because we are running from the person that we are. We're afraid of being judged by the world. Again, it takes strength to be vulnerable. It takes strength to be yourself. I'm going to read you this lyric from a very famous song that teenagers listen to. It's Iris from the Goo Goo Dolls. I don't want the world to see me because I don't think that they'd understand. I think many of us can relate to that lyric, especially when we're young and teenagers. Still, it does seem to be true that people are going to judge you either way. I mean, that's certainly true. You could be who you truly are and be judged severely, or you could be fake and be judged severely. Which of those are you willing to accept? Or to even take the extreme, what about being loved for what you are not? That's a very real temptation. Andre Gide said, "It is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for what you are not." But if we are going to be judged either way, then why do some people still live fake lives? Why do some people choose to be hated for what they are rather than being hated for... let me say that again. Why do some people choose to be hated for what they are not rather than being hated for what they are? And as far as I can tell, this seems to give people an excuse. It's a clause. You see, if you act as if you are something that you are not and the world hates you, well, you can always use the excuse. You can always tell yourself, well, it doesn't really matter because that's not really who I am anyway. They're not hating the real me. They're hating the image I put on. If, on the other hand, you be as genuine to yourself as you possibly can, if you live according to nature and people hate you, well, then they are hating the real you. And that's a very hard pill to swallow. That's another reason why vulnerability, being genuine to yourself, to thyself be true, is an act of courage. What are you, though, if you pretend to be something that you are not? You're an actor. You're acting. And no, I'm not hating on the actors of today. I think, probably against popular opinion, I think actors do play some role in society. I mean, they definitely create movies and a lot of things that basically allow us to feel very deep emotional things. And really tell stories that we learn a lot of life lessons from, and somebody's got to do that. So, I don't think actors are completely useless, morally speaking, which I know a lot of philosophers might disagree with that. But the temptation to become an actor is unbelievably strong. Why wouldn't you want to pretend to be something that you're not if you're going to be loved for it? In Pinocchio, one of his temptations to vice was to be that. It was to be an actor. When you're young, you need to figure out your identity. That's what we all have to go through when we're young. What are you going to choose? How simple it would be to become an actor. Let's say you can figure out what everyone loves. Why wouldn't you choose to just be that if that's what you fundamentally want? Put on a face, act a certain way, and the world loves you. But doing so is actually cowardice. Cowardice is running from who you are. The good, yes, but also the bad and the ugly. It's running from the terrible, deficient person that you fear you might be and that you probably actually are in some ways. And the opposite of cowardice is courage. Courage is when you stop running from who you are and you integrate it into your identity. You basically become your identity. It's when you stop letting the fear of being hated for what you are motivate you and instead learn to love and honor who you actually are. In other words, when you learn to become a friend to yourself. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. If you like this, please consider leaving a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. If you're new here, episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Check out my Substack, Telegram, Instagram, Facebook, YouTubes. I'm all over the place. Check me out there. You can find me at The Strong Stoic. Not going to bug you anymore. Thanks again. Cheers. Until next time. Peace.